Perfect.
So, and I can't tell you how excited I am to both reconnect and then hear a presentation of yours. But before we give you the microphone and walk into this one, I want to introduce my friend Rach Brand. She, similar to you, is somebody that I knew a long time ago, and through our work in the food and agriculture innovation space, we bumped into each other and had a couple of good conversations. And she's been kind enough to co-host a few of these webinars with me, because oftentimes I lose my train of thought, or she has a funnier joke than I do, and we'll certainly interject that. And she has married into art. I mean, she's a creative anyway, but she certainly has an art thread in her world as well. But Rach, I will never do you justice introducing you, so I'll let you introduce yourself.
So yeah, nice to meet you. My mom actually went to Pratt Institute, and I went to Maryland Institute myself. My background is art, and my husband is a professional artist full time. So I've spent quite a bit of time in the art world, not necessarily by choice, but maybe by birth and marriage.
Sure.
It's a really interesting industry. We personally invest in NFTs and also in art. We've collected for about 2.5 decades. So I have quite a collection, and I am excited to hear about what you do, because I actually work as a debt lender. I was in investing on the venture capital side, and over the pandemic, I moved into debt lending, which has led me into private equity. So I am very interested in what you're doing, mostly because of the family office side and how you're managing collections. I think it's incredibly related to what I do. Honestly, it's just another currency, the way I think about it. Art is a tremendous opportunity for us to have something that's real, tangible, and actually does trade, over time. So I'm excited to hear what you have to say.
Great. You have a super interesting background.
And before I let you break into this here, I do have, anytime Ann spoke on stage in the Baltimore area, I would make every effort to be there. And at one point, Ann had probably one of the most glamorous galleries in Baltimore, a brand new development in Baltimore. And I was heartbroken to hear the gallery would be closing down. And I had a business trip I had to be on. It was one of those, it was a coin flip. Do I not go on this crucial annual business trip and go to Ann's closing ceremony, or I go on the business trip? And I had to go on the business trip. And I missed the closing ceremony. And it was only described to me by Ann, so I never visually saw anything. But it sounds like one of the most remarkable closings of a gallery that anyone has witnessed. And Ann, I don't know if you want to share anything about that.
I want to know
before you get started.
Just lots of bad wine, I think, and we were shut down by law enforcement. Yeah, there's a lot of those were different times.
Where was it, Ann? In Baltimore?
It was actually in the original. So I think now it's still J. Crew. So it was in that Harbor East area, right as it was kind of being constructed.
Oh, yeah.
So there was Patrick Sutton on one side with his interior design shop, which was sort of like a pop-up. So I think we kind of knew that it wasn't going to last forever, but we really tried to squeeze the juice out of it while we were in the space. So it's such a cool location.
I actually lived in Spinnaker Bay.
Oh, really? Okay. So
you know, so funny. So I love that whole area. I was just trying to figure out where you guys actually were. Yeah. That's awesome. Amazing.
So Andrew, am I going to be able to share the deck, or do I have to send that?
You may. Here you go. My apologies. You may share it now, and probably before you even share the deck. And who are you? I mean, because there's probably people in the audience who aren't part of your fan club, who have no idea why I'm talking to you.
Do I have to divulge my true identity?
Well, whatever it is that you want to share, feel free to let us know, because I know
it's
there
good.
was
I have John here to fact check / humble me. Yeah.
That's true.
Well, I am an art advisor. So right now my primary role is as advisor to the Krause Collection, which is actually a private collection of contemporary work that's based here in Des Moines. So it's interesting advising on a private collection as opposed to a public one, because I'm really unable to talk about specifics. So I can't tell you exactly what artists are in the collection. I'll answer yes or no questions, but I can't come out and tell you how many pieces there are and things like that. But it is contemporary art, and it's spread across about 8 different locations now, several of which are in Europe. And what's happening is that the collection is starting to become more public. And what I mean by that is here in the headquarters, which is where I'm sitting today. This is in downtown Des Moines. This is beautiful Renzo piano building. that was built for the owner just a couple years ago. And so it's almost entirely glass. So you can see right in from the street and from a couple of other levels too. And there's probably about 200 pieces from the collection that are on display throughout the building. So the idea is that the associates interact with the work and have experiences with it. There's also a dedicated gallery space here on the first floor, not open to the public yet, but again, you can see it from the street if you're driving by or walking by. So we're at this kind of inflection point with the collection here where, yes, it's still private, but pieces from it are becoming more public. The owner also opened a boutique hotel in the Piedmont area of Italy about a year and a half ago. And so we designed the art program for that space, and I do the curation for that area too. So again, those are pieces on loan from the private collection. So slowly but surely, it's kind of turning the page from private to quasi-public. But I'm also an appraiser. I'm an ASA trained appraiser. So I do a lot of appraisals of large collections, medium and small. So I'll appraise a piece, two pieces, but about 3 years ago, I appraised 9,000 pieces at American University. It was a vast collection of crazy, just about the craziest stuff you can think of. So maps and original paintings and from the good, the bad, the ugly kind of situation there. So that was about a year and a half, that project. So yeah, a little bit of everything.
It's interesting. There's like, I'm looking up as you're talking because I'm finding like nothing on the collection.
Yeah.
It's really
Yeah.
interesting.
And
So
when I
what
first
is that
started,
about?
yeah, when I first started meeting with the owner here too, with the collector, it was really difficult because, until I got to a certain stage in conversations with him, he was unable to share the contents of the collection too. So we're talking in these very vague, high level, broad terms about what's in the collection. And can I advise on that? At some point I just said, hey, look, like I'll sign an NDA because I need to know what we're talking about here. Part of it is the need for privacy. He's a high profile person in the Midwest, not particularly outside of the Midwest, but and it's no secret, so I can share that with you. If you've been to the Midwest, there's these little gas stations and convenience stores called Come and Go. So he's the owner of Come and Go. It's a family run business. He's third generation or fourth generation. I'm sorry. No, third. But then he's diversified Krause Group's holdings. So there's vineyards now. There's Italian soccer club, women's soccer club, a soccer team here in Des Moines. There's solar transportation, fuel transportation. So the business has kind of run the gamut now, and collecting for
investor.
He's the owner of all of these. Yeah. And so it all comes under this umbrella of Krause Group now. And the collection is his and his alone. But it's the Krause Group associates who get to enjoy it and partake of it. And then of course the guests at Casa de Longo, which is the hotel in the Piedmont. So, collecting for him really started as a passion. He does not come from a family of avid collectors. He didn't inherit a family collection. So it's also interesting in terms of advising, every person or family or group that you advise has this sort of background about what got them started. And I think it's best if you can kind of identify what motivation that is in the beginning, because it really helps you understand how to advise them and where to steer them. If a person is purely motivated by the idea that, hey, maybe in 10 years, if I hold on to this piece, I'm going to make some fabulous return, the advising for that person looks a lot different than the person who says, I don't care what this next body of work is by this artist. I love her and I always want to support her. I'll buy a piece out of every, group of work that she continues to make over the next 20 years or something. So different motivations kind of result in different looking collections and different advisement along the way.
And I'm sorry, I'm just gonna like dominate Andrew.
Yeah, no,
these questions.
This is great.
So
I love
interested.
it. I love domination.
So, okay, so he's obviously like within a family member group or holdings company. So there's multiple voices in the crowd. Are you actually resourcing for all of those different voices? Or are you really strictly focused on the owner?
That's a great question. And again, it depends on the family. So with this particular family, the collector is this one person, but certainly there's families where there's a panel of people. One thing that makes a private collection typically different from a specifically corporate collection is that the corporate collections tend to put together boards. One of them is so that people feel included. One reason why they would do that is inclusion, getting different voices and perspectives at the table. So they might have somebody who is really tenured in the law firm next to a junior associate, next to an intern, et cetera, just so they can kind of diversify the feedback on the artwork that they're considering. But here, it's one person making the decision and the buck stops there. So I really don't have to work with other family members. However, what's happening now is as his children get a little bit older and they're moving into their first homes and getting more settled, some of them are interested in art. Now, not all of them. And this is what's also interesting too, as we talk about things like succession plans. You always have the one person who really just doesn't care about art, and that's fine. But you have to kind of build them into that future planning, because what if all of a sudden they do care about art? What if the interest is only financial? And all these things are okay, but you do have to think about it ahead of time and kind of build that into the scope of stuff.
So now you're really kind of managing a family and their legacy in some ways.
Yeah, you've got it. And how is the acquisition structured? So if you have someone who's purchasing for their own private collection out of their own private funds, meaning, this is not under the umbrella of, again, this is not a corporate collection. Then what does happen when the children or the family, they want to start collecting art too? If there's not a fund specifically set up for that, or the acquisitions aren't funneling through a company, then the financial onus is on the person acquiring the art. Chances are they're going to have a much, much different budget than, the senior head of their family. So, and then you start to get into this education process, because of course they've grown up around this amazing museum level quality of work in some cases, but their budget is, the beer budget on the caviar kind of taste thing. And so you start going through that process too, or their tastes are just incredibly different than their dads or their moms or their uncles or whatever. And 99% of the time that is the case, which is another thing you have to keep in mind as you think about, okay, what are we doing with this collection when the main collector passes? Chances are your kids, they're not going to want this stuff. So what's the plan? Who gets it?
Interestingly, it's probably the grandchild that wants it, because it seems to skip some kind of generational thing. At least that's what I've seen within my friend groups. Like,
yeah,
the
and
youngest person is really interested.
Yeah, or art is such a loaded thing, right? It's not just because what you mentioned at the top of the conversation, the fact that it's a tangible thing. I remember this scenario years ago, this like 25 years ago. I used to work at a 19th, 20th century gallery in DC, and we had these beautiful grand portraits of women dressed in like robes and furs and all this stuff. So this guy came in who is a pretty steady client, and he said, I want to get this beautiful portrait of this woman for my wife as a surprise for her birthday. And she had this like seductive look to her, and her fur was like hanging off her shoulder, and she was looking over her shoulder. So we actually built this beautiful box for it, packaged it up. He brought it home, surprised her, whatever. A couple weeks later, he comes in, and the piece, he's got it on a dolly, wheeling it in the door. And we're like, what happened? What? And he goes, oh, my wife wants to kill me. She said that this woman is looking at her all the time while she changes in our bedroom, and she hates it.
I can totally feel her.
yeah, like this creepy woman, kind of this voyeuristic thing. And so it's like you've got situations like that where a piece means something to somebody that it wouldn't mean to somebody else. And so a grandchild might like it, or they might remember that like their grandfather spent money on that instead of their college education or something, and be bitter about it. And so there's all this loaded emotional connection to these works too, that really you kind of have to take that into consideration with the future planning.
So Andrew, I have one last key question, and then have at it.
No, go ahead. I love these questions.
I love this. This is great.
And I want to be like your best friend, right? Like, I have so many questions.
Yes,
okay.
yes.
Okay, yes. Okay, so NFTs. Like, this is a whole conversation about how an NFT even started, right? So I'm fascinated by this model where it's 10% and 10% every time you sell. So you're basically creating dividends. And I'm wondering, when you think about this as you grow into like a estate planning or family planning from the ground up, how does technology play a role in that? Because something like an NFT feels like a really logical solution, so that original owner always holds some value even after it changes hands.
Yeah, I think that it's kind of still too early in the NFT ecosystem to understand exactly how it's going to work. But I do agree that there's things, I think specifically targeted to security and provenance and droit de suite, that are going to force people to kind of adopt this technology. And, that I always compare it to QR codes in a way. In Asia, people were shopping with QR codes years and years before people in the US. And then there was this forcing episode, which was really COVID for us, I'd say, was that tipping point. Certainly adoption of QR codes was going up in the West anyway, but COVID happened. And then all of a sudden now COVID's kind of passed, and restaurants still haven't put paper menus back. People are still using QR codes. And you have people in their 80s, like my dad, who's using a QR code now and feels very comfortable with it. And so I think until technology becomes, with each type of thing, until the technology becomes something very useful and logical, it doesn't really get adopted. So I think things like provenance, where you can track the exchange and sale of that piece of artwork on the blockchain in perpetuity, I mean, that's incredibly appealing. And the win of it all is that it's appealing for everybody. It's appealing for the artist, who can now say, hey, buddy, you owe me 10%, and it's appealing to the person who's considering buying an expensive piece of art, that wants to know, is this person really telling me the truth that it came from this studio or this gallery? So I think as those things improve and people become aware of the functionality of that stuff, that NFTs as actual collectible artwork will become a more valid thing. Right now, if you look at the data, people that are collecting NFT art, their hold period for that piece is so small that you really have to look at it as they're not collecting. They're using this as an investment and flipping it. It's speculative, like some other form of investment, but you can't really call it art collecting right now because of that.
Yeah. Oh, interesting. Oh, I haven't thought about it from a timing perspective, but I think that's actual. Yeah.
Yeah, I forget the actual amount of time, but it's very short. Like, I want to say 6 weeks is the average or something like that. Don't quote me on that one, but I had the data a few months ago, but
So
it is really
using
small.
it like currency.
Correct.
They're not really waiting for it to, evolve. Interesting.
That's correct. And that's what I would say about this fractional art ownership model too, that's become so popular, especially I think Masterworks.io has done a masterful job of pumping their name out there. They kind of seem like they're the only game in town, which they aren't, but they've taken over that space. And, call it what you want, but I would say don't call it art collecting. It's one other way to diversify your portfolio. But they'll be very frank with you too when you go through the process of joining their program. There's almost nobody who's an art collector subscribing to their services. These are financial advisors.
I went through the process.
You did? So did I. I was like a spy.
I was so curious. And then they like call you the next day and they like book you, and they're like, they talk you through the whole process, and they want to know how much you're willing to spend every single month. And it's such an interesting experience versus the passion and love I'm sure somebody comes to you with and says, this is what I'm sourcing and this is what I want. And yeah, I have a budget, but it's not really about the budget. It's actually about the piece and the work that you're trying to create.
And then going back to that tangible component too, at the top of this conversation, that was something I talked about with the Masterworks rep that I was on the phone with. I said, well, do people kind of push back and go like, where's my thing? Where's my art to show off and hold on to? And he said, well, that's actually the next stage of this that we're working on, is having something, a token, a whatever that, you can carry around and show people in your wallet that would be that fraction of that painting or something like that. So, yeah.
I can't wait to see that one. That's going to be exciting.
There's actually a company right now called, it's called Particle. And so it's the same idea as Masterworks, except you're allowed to pick which part of the painting you just bought, right? So it's absurd. So if it's like a landscape and there's a deer in it, you could be like, I just want to invest in the deer, and then you get that little,
Is
that
it worth more
portion.
money? Like, would the
No,
deer be
no,
worth more money than the
no,
grass?
the shares aren't weighted. No, but I mean, they should be, right? But because that's kind of how paintings work. If you have figurative, it's more than if it's a landscape. Yeah, I know. It's wild. So there are things like that too.
Oh, that's
Yield
amazing.
Street is another interesting one. So Yield Street makes funds. So
Yeah.
they'll create a grouping of 12 contemporary masterworks, all painted by artists of color, let's say. And so you buy shares in that fund. Or here's 15 works by woman artists of a high profile or whatever, and you buy shares in that fund.
Oh,
So there's all these
love
different
Yield
models.
Street.
Yeah, different models.
Nice.
Street art, they do sneakers. They were kind of the pioneer in that street art space, and collectibles.
That's amazing. What a great idea.
Yeah.
Well, okay, so I'm passing it over to Andrew. I will have many more questions.
Rach, you're awesome. And one of the neat things about having Rach as a co-host, and Rach, again, thanks for making time for this. I know you're super, super busy for doing this, is that she reads my mind. I mean, she asks the same questions I would have asked, but she does it better. And she has a better context understanding of it. So I really do appreciate that. One of the things I do want to go back to, it's a very basic thing, but it's very, very important to this conversation, and we've echoed it several times, is I'm an art lover who loves to invest in art that I want to hang on my walls. There's certain things I'm taken with and just over the moon with, and I get a little obsessed by it sometimes as well, which I'm sure Ann sees quite a bit. And there is one genre of art, and I will admit it right now, I love impermanent street art. So wheat paper, stickers, things that you have to be there in the moment to witness. And it's not graffiti, it's not tagging, because I feel that's a substandard. Because if someone's taken the time to buy a sticker and put it somewhere and know that that's only going to last a little while, I really do appreciate that style of art. So those are the ones I track, and I certainly credit Ann quite a bit with enlightening me to that part of the world. Now, Ann, is there a slide deck, a formal presentation that you would like to share with us, or would you like to continue?
Sure.
Excellent. Well, the floor is yours.
Okay, great. Well, I'll share this.
Control.
And if it gets too boring, just let me know. And
I won't let you know. You'll know, because the entire audience, except for me and you, will drop off at that point. So
now you get to see my really junky desktop here too. So
I'm spying. Yeah. What else you got?
Yeah. Oh gosh, I can't move this thing. Sorry, folks. I just got a new laptop this morning. So you're witnessing me trying to figure all this out here.
It looks like a PC. Good for you. Well done.
It is. It is. I have my Mac next to it, So I always kind of start with this macro slide about the art market. And I know we're talking about future planning with art collections and generational collections, but it always really surprises me. Collectors, a lot of times, unless they really have been steeped in art collecting from like a family perspective, sometimes don't really know much about the art market at all. And so they hear these big numbers being thrown out, they see these snippets of information, and I continue to get enraged on the sidelines because I see the very irresponsible ways that this data is thrown about. And I feel that it is my obligation to tell people what's behind these big numbers, because it's not always what it kind of seems to be. So this is the traditional number that's always thrown out as, the art market is a $65.1 billion industry. This number is so mushy, it's wild. So everything from these, art market reports are collected from self-reported data mostly. So that's one thing to keep in mind. So anything that's gallery driven and not auction house driven, where you can see real numbers and pull them from databases, is all self-reported data. And galleries are sort of like hedging their, we want to look like we did really well last year, but not too well. And so how accurate are these numbers? We don't know. This is also really only reflective of those auction numbers. So this is leaving out a huge chunk of those brick and mortar mom and pop galleries. And certainly, they're not having the turnover and the high dollar sales that an auction is. So this number wouldn't be doubled or something if those folks were added into it, but it is a significant part of the art ecosystem. And really, I would argue, and it's true, the part of the art ecosystem that most of us know. Most of us will never attend an auction at Sotheby's or Christie's. Most artworks never get to a Sotheby's or Christie's. So it's really those mid-tier and lower galleries selling 5,000, 10,000, 20, 50 that are much more of what people know about the art world and unfortunately aren't really included in this. So this is another chart that the art world loves to trot out, and that, you know, magazines like Forbes and everything always publish. This is that classic graph that shows the May Moses Index. So the May Moses Index it's these two guys from New York, and they decided that they were going to plot the trajectory of a group of artworks over the period of 70, 80 years. And the criteria is that each artwork had to be sold at least twice. And by virtue of the fact that the only way to track artwork that's sold is through the auction market, they had to be sold twice at auction. So once you kind of know that that's the data building this graph, you can see what a small set that is, because again, not many artworks ever even make it to the auction block. So you're talking about the greatest hits here. You know, you're talking about Picasso and Warhol and, you know, of course, 80, 90% male artists, European. And contemporary, right? So it's a very, very skewed look at the art world, but this has become sort of like the standard bearer graph for it. I think it was about a year ago, maybe 2 years ago now, Sotheby's actually purchased the May Moses Index. So I find that very fascinating too. It was never called the Sotheby's May Moses Index. It was always May Moses. Art. Yeah, and so you have to kind of think like, is there now a little bit of extra bias built into this? One of the big three auction houses has put their stamp on this. Oops, I didn't mean to.
Reflected in number of products or number of pieces of art actually sold?
You know what? I've got that number somewhere later in the deck. It's not many. It's not many. This is not 50,000 pieces or something like that. I mean, again, it's a very small subset. This is what the May Moses Index then gets used for, is this second most popular graph, which is showing like, wow, what a great investment art is. We should run out and buy a bunch of art to hedge against the S&P 500. Please don't do that. Please don't.
Well, I mean, I have a question on this one because so the S&P, anyone can really participate in, right?
Yep.
When you think about art, it's really so much to do with ego. So you're basically buying into ego, and not everyone can compete with that, especially in middle market.
Well, you've got it. And again, what this graph is showing are those artworks that make up that set of the May Moses. So you're talking about people that can afford $1 million painting, a $20 million painting. This isn't, hey, I want to hang something over my couch that I really love, you know? And so, you know, you can do that in the S&P. To your point, you can go out and buy a few shares of Apple since you really love the product so much or whatever. You can't do that here. That's where Masterworks and the other fractional art ownership models are trying to take advantage of this and go, oh, wait, there is that desire to participate in the art market the way that you participate in a traditional market. Here's how we're going to do that. We're going to take that $20 million piece and turn it into bite-sized amounts. But we'll see some flaws in that model in a bit. So you can just kind of see here too. So this is, you know, this shows you how skewed everything is, right? So you have this over 10 million and look at the height of that versus this, you know, so you start to like dig into things and you go, wait a minute, this is not terribly useful information, these end graphs that people get. Okay, so this is kind of what we were talking about earlier. And since we talked about it so much, I won't spend too much time on this slide, but there's a lot of questions right now about, hey, can I invest in art without actually acquiring a physical piece of it? Or can I have some sort of like, you know, partial stake of ownership in a $200 million painting? And the answer is yes now. Some of these art tech startups actually aren't fractional ownership models. So I put a few others in here because I think they're kind of at the forefront of figuring out this blockchain provenance situation. So TagSmart is one of them. TagSmart actually created a technology where they put a watermark on the back of paper paper art. And I believe they can do it on canvas now too. There's a built-in sort of barcode in that watermark. And then that drives right to the database, goes on the blockchain, and you've tracked your work. So no more having to save invoices, receipts, no more questioning if the invoice or receipt is fabricated, which happens at the very high level. People create fake receipts using vintage rabbit glue and vellum paper, and they go to all sorts of lengths to prove that this is real. So that kind of is helping mitigate that. Art Money, I think, has been a really interesting company to follow. So that allows buyers to purchase a piece of work with just a little bit of money down and then pay in installments over a set amount of time. And what's great is from the dealer perspective, you get paid 100% upfront after that deposit. So you don't have to wait around for your client to pay. Now you sacrifice a percentage to Art Money, but it's pretty small. They're making their money off of those, incremental kind of sales across the art market.
Like they're like in a firm or a lender. They're a traditional lender.
Yeah, exactly. And
cool.
this technology has been great for that middle type of market gallery, that gallery selling $20,000 or selling emerging artists. And what's also very cool about it is, as the dealer, as the gallery, they don't insist that you apply it to all the pieces in the gallery. Because as a gallerist, you know that the business model is so skewed. You might have one piece where you make 50% profit when you sell it, and then another piece where you make 20 because of all the investment you've put into it, or the cost of the products that the artist needs to kind of claw back. So Art Money says, great, you want to apply it to this painting, but not this one, go ahead. So it's very flexible and kind of user-friendly. So this just describes the fractional art ownership model that we were talking about earlier. And again, when you start to dig into it, which, Rachel, you've been through the process, so you understand how this works. But if you haven't been through that onboarding process, it's pretty eye-opening. And I would say the biggest call out of this is just remembering how art functions as an asset, which is it's highly illiquid. Anyone who, lost their job and needs to sell their Warhol tomorrow to cover their mortgage can tell you, it's just about impossible, or you're going to take some huge hit at best. So the hold time for the work that's included in these funds is 5 to 7 years is what they advise. Be willing to kind of sit on this for 5 to 7 years, guys. But of course, they don't put that at the top of the conversation in the bold print. It's sort of buried in there. So for people who think that they're going to buy a little share of this and then flip it, and within a year, it's not quite what's going to happen. And then you see they take out all their fees and whatever. And by the time the money is distributed, the check's pretty anemic that shows up. So
interesting.
So I always work Axel Foley into my presentations. So if you've been through one of my presentations in the past few years, you'll notice Eddie Murphy in here. But I always put this in because I think that movie, that role where he's in the gallery, and sometimes I play that clip, but I wasn't sure who was going to be on here. There's a lot of swearing. So I omitted it. But I think how he feels in that art gallery space is how most of us feel in art galleries. Very like a fish out of water, and that we walk in, it's quiet, people are judging us, we're looking at bizarre stuff, people are telling us it's sold, but there's no tag that says it's sold. So is it really? It's a very weird space to manage. And then also this photo right here, where I think when we think about who's collecting this art, we think of this like very, very sophisticated, savvy art collector. And many times, that's not the case. I mean, it's just everybody collects art. And now, especially with tech folks in the mix and, technology playing a role, the profile of the art collector has really changed over the past 20 or so years. So this was interesting. I'm sure a lot of you saw that last week, Paul Allen, the founder of Vulcan and the co-founder of Microsoft, sold his collection at Christie's, and it hit $1.5 billion, which was a record. Prior to that, the Maclau collection, which was broken into 2 sales at Sotheby's, had held the record at $922.2 million. And that was just several months ago. So it's wild that there was that leap. What's interesting to me about the Paul Allen collection is that it was really a greatest hits type of collection. So he could have hung all of those pieces in a museum, and the title of the show could have been Modern Art History 101. There's a piece by Cezanne, a piece by Monet, and what he did a really good job of was finding the most identifiable Cezanne, finding the most Gauguin. You never looked at the pieces that Paul had and went, I wonder who did that. They were screamingly whatever that artist was known for. And I think traditionally those are the things when it's a big name artist that do really, really well at auction, because you're really looking at history play out right in front of you. And they're difficult to get because many of those great examples are locked up in private museum or permanent museum collections. So to have them come to the block is kind of a big deal.
And did those, curious on Paul's collection, was it sold as a unit or individually?
No, individually.
And so they all dispersed.
100% sell through, which is also unusual, but yes, every item sold. And I believe, every item sold. So I was trying to think if there was like a specific one that set a record, and I can't remember off the top of my head, but the collection as a whole set a record.
Was there any digital art in there?
No, I believe he has digital holdings, but they weren't included in the sale.
Well, that's interesting from a hold standpoint. If it's not a 6-week hold, maybe there's another purpose for him.
Yeah. I mean, what's interesting with that too is, he collected throughout his lifetime. And at no point did he really do any sort of wholesale sell-off, and so you can kind of get a picture of the collector and how they behave with buying and selling too. And so I think the takeaway from that is, this wasn't a person who was trying to make a buck on this. He enjoyed it. He lived with it for a while. A few years ago, a big portion of it was on tour. So it stopped at a Philadelphia-based museum. I think there might have been a spot in DC where it went. And so he used it as a community building tool as well. So it's really interesting. So again, I think art as an asset, it's such an interesting thing. It is an asset, sure, but there's all these things about it that make it unique. And I think if you can compare it to anything, maybe it's most similar to real estate. You're not buying and selling every day. I mean, unless you're a flipper, but even then it's slow. Highly illiquid. Again, you can't really let go of something and get a sale immediately. Valuing it is very difficult because just like with real estate, you have to find a comparable in the marketplace. And like, what if there is no comparable? By virtue of the fact that this is art, it is a unique property. So take, this is more of a collectible item, but take like a NASA spacesuit that comes up for auction. I mean, how many NASA spacesuits that went to the moon, let's say, are actually in circulation? There might not have been any that have been sold at auction. Again, this is a territory I don't know about, but so when you're trying to pull comparables for things like that to assign a value to an item, it can be incredibly difficult. And sometimes what happens is you really don't know what the market will bear until you put that thing up at auction and you realize, oh, wow, there's no appetite for this. or we grossly underestimated how much interest there'd be in this. So the other thing to think about as we start shifting the conversation to, the core of this, which is future planning for art collections, there's those 4 bullets at the bottom that also really influence what G2 and G3 want to do with this art, in considerations that the main collector really has to think through and have conversations about with the kids, which is it costs a lot of money to keep up an art collection. Certainly the more pieces, the more costly, but neons, the bulbs need to be replaced and everything needs to be stored in a very specific way. Monumental sculptures, they need to be polished and cleaned, sometimes every month, depending on what the medium is. Just wild stuff that, unless you build that into the program, you're really kind of dumping these assets onto people, and there's going to be a large price tag attached to it just for maintenance. So this is kind of a wimpy little slide here. Sorry, I didn't build this out too much, but this goes back to one of the points we were talking about earlier, understanding your client's motivation for collecting is really huge and can really inform how you advise your client and what kind of direction you steer them in terms of what to do when they pass the collection along. So, there's families like the Rubel family, the Broads, who opened up their own museum in California. And there's a reason why a lot of private collectors and family collectors end up at the end of their collecting time opening up their own museum or donating much of what they have to a museum. The museums are already set up to accommodate the artwork, so they're not giving a collection to a charity that doesn't know what to do with fine art or how to store it or how to show it. Hopefully it's a place where the art can be used for scholarly research and community outreach and teaching and things like that. So depending on what kind of collection you have, you can kind of gear it towards those places too. And a deep collection, thematic, encyclopedic, there's no right or wrong way to collect, but kind of knowing what your collection is can help you steer it in the right direction when you're ready to pass it along.
Do you have a way of defining that?
Yeah,
Like,
so I
as you-
mentioned, I'm sorry.
Oh, I think you were going to answer the question. I was just clarifying again.
I was going to
Go
put
ahead.
definitions in here and then I didn't. I slacked off. But so a thematic collection, there's a great collector, Henry Buell, and his entire collection is about hands. So he doesn't care about medium. He has photographs, he has sculptures, he has paintings, but the focal point of all the artwork is the topic of hands. And it's really, really interesting. And so that would be, and he even collects across dates. So it's not just contemporary, there's modern, there's antiquities, but again, that theme runs through it. So that's an example of a thematic collection. A deep collection is where a collector gets really into a certain genre, a certain artist, a certain time period. So Arte Povera, let's say. And so they start collecting all of these Italian contemporary and modern pieces that really show the breadth and depth of that period of work. And you can do the same for a specific artist or something like that too. And
Like a
encyclopedia.
Cohen collector, like the Cohen sisters did that.
Yeah,
Interesting.
exactly. Although I would say that there's also borders on an encyclopedic collection because they kind of have one of each of the artists that make up that period of time. And so it's not just deep, it's also broad. And that would be the encyclopedic, where it's more of a kind of grouping of a lot of things. And sure, there'll be like little pockets of theme in there, but it's maybe more reflective of the collector's desires than it is an art history movement or an in-depth look at an artist's lifetime work or something. So one thing that is incredibly important is to make sure you have the right experts involved with your collection really from the beginning, because just like with everything else in life, if you wait until the last minute and you have to scramble to put a team together, it's never great. And the art world is particularly fraught to do that in because there's not a lot of regulations. So for example, the art appraisal field is unregulated. So you could hang a shingle outside your house today saying Andrew Rose, art appraiser. And there'd be no recourse in terms of what I could do if I was your client and you appraised a piece of work for me. There are credentials you can get and programs you can go through, which I have and many of my colleagues have, and that's what you need to look for when you're selecting someone to do that. But it's the same with art advisor. There's certainly trade groups like Art Dealers Association and Art Advisors Association that vet people and that have standards and codes of ethics. And so you kind of want to work through those or work with someone that's very trusted from a colleague or a friend. And then you need a really good legal team. There's a lot of IRS regulations around all of this stuff. And you want to make sure that you have somebody who's up and up on all of those codes, which I'll be totally transparent. I am not an attorney. I'm not a tax accountant. So this is not my area of expertise, but I certainly know the folks who would be good for this. So you want to have all of those people kind of advising you along the way if possible, because they can also advise you on how to purchase things instead of just walking into the gallery and buying the piece of work, there may be ways you can route that acquisition that end up saving you money or that make it easier for you to pass it along, when you're ready to do that. So again, thinking ahead is huge. I think just the biggest takeaway is have those conversations with everybody involved, which they're difficult to have and they're very loaded. They're kind of shockingly loaded, but there's all this emotion tied up in the art collection. And I think a lot of assumptions that, oh, of course the kids will want to keep the art, or yeah, he loved that piece, so he's going to want to hang it. I don't think so. And so if you wait until the end, again, and you pass, you have about, I don't know what it is. I think it's on the next slide, but it's something like 6 months or whatever to pay that estate tax. And it could be a whopper. And so you're really not doing your family any favors by sort of gifting them this art with this giant price tag. You also want to think about things in terms of, or I'm sorry, 60 days. It's right there for the appraisal too. So that's another thing. You want to know what's in your collection. So that sounds kind of ridiculous, but it's almost like when you move houses and you think you know what's in your garage, but then you go out there because you need to move again. And you're like, where did these 400 boxes come from? And it's all your stuff, but you don't know what's in there exactly. This is kind of what happens to folks, especially that have large kind of rambling collections. So there might be a portion of it that they inherited. There might be a portion of it that was absorbed through another business acquisition. So for example, I had a client for a while that was purchasing related businesses, and sometimes those businesses would sell the contents of the store with it, and there would be fine art in there. And so that would get absorbed by default kind of into the collection. So the rule of thumb for contemporary work and most modern work is to have work appraised every 5 years. The contemporary art market is pretty volatile. As you can see from that example with the Paul Allen collection, all of a sudden a new record can be hit, and it's a pretty dramatic climb. And so the artists included in that, of course, now their market has changed a bit and their sales history has changed a bit. So you want to get that appraisal refreshed about every 5 years. And then that just makes it easier to build on as well. So again, if God forbid something should happen, the meat of the appraisal is already there and you're not sort of starting from scratch or reinventing the wheel. You want to make sure that you understand what your intended legacy is. That's a huge part too. It's very interesting. People tend to have general ideas like, well, I want the kids to have it or something. Well, what does that exactly mean? All of it? All the art? Or is there a part of it that you want to give to your old college? Or, maybe you want to offer it back to the gallery that you purchased it from or something like that. So thinking ahead can really help you also maximize the profits from it as well. Nothing is worse than selling under duress or selling without a plan. But that's where an advisor comes in as well. They can say, you know what, for this section of art, you're going to probably get the most bang for the buck if you sell it at auction. There's going to be many people far flung who are interested in bidding on this. They'll drive the prices up. You'll see a higher price than if you were to go to the gallery, to the dealer of this work and sell it back to them. Sometimes, however, you're obliged to do that. So that's the other part where these appraisals come in. As an appraiser, you look at those sales transactions and then you share that with the advisor and you go, oh, these 5 pieces, we're contractually obliged to, when we go to sell this, offer it back to the selling gallery. I thought this was a really straightforward graph from Morgan Stanley, who printed this report about art as an asset. You can just kind of see the pros and cons of each plan. I think it's obvious that no planning is not the plan. But other than that, it really does depend on upon your preferences in a lot of ways. Living with the art is very important to people. So creating a plan where you have to surrender the art during your lifetime, even if it's financially beneficial to you, is just sometimes a non-starter for people. And that's okay. That's where that passionate collector comes in. If you're not emotionally attached to it, or you're your interest in getting the tax break is bigger than living with that object, then perhaps you surrender the pieces, you donate them during your lifetime. And then there's all sorts of carve outs you can build into arrangements that you have with organizations where you donate your work. So, you can say, hey, I want to hold on to this for 10 years, and then I'm going to surrender the physical pieces. One thing to be prepared for is just because you donate artworks doesn't mean they will be on display. So there's also a little bit of education that needs to go around that. People are often disappointed that they donate a collection to a museum and then that collection sits in the basement for 4 years because the museum already has shows planned for the next 5 and this just wasn't a part of it. So it's important to have those discussions too and kind of manage expectations on both fronts. So this is just kind of some information that breaks out the details of all those different options. I'll save I'll save this so that you can look at it later. I don't want to bore you to death here.
Oh, I'll print it out. And the reason there's an ulterior motive here as well. My parents are getting up there in a few years, and they have a significant rambling art collection, which was appraised in the last 10 years. But when I told him I was doing this presentation, I said, we're talking about a generational transfer of this art. I said, I want you to pick out the top 3 pieces we should liquidate so I can start buying my own art. They didn't see the humor in that statement the way I did. So I'm going to
they didn't like that idea.
I got to go face the band in January and head down there.
You tried.
Yeah, I did, but I appreciate it. Anyway, back to your presentation.
No, that's okay. So this is just, showing you some links to resources. So one of the great things is in the past 15 or so years, all of the very trusted banks and financial institutions, or most of them at least, have started some sort of ancillary art branch. So they can really advise on the economics around your art collection, which is great because if you already have a relationship with Bank of America or UBS or something, you could just stay there. They understand your financial profile anyway. So it's sort of a seamless transition. There's also a link at the bottom of this to an interview with UBS's curator, Mary. And so she manages, it's in the thousands. It's a collection in the thousands across many countries. And she talks about the different ways in which people collect in this interview. So it's really fascinating. It's not about the UBS collection. It's about strategies behind collecting, emotions, how your collecting style changes over the years. And so it's fascinating. And it's a panel discussion. So that's about all the nuts and bolts there. But any immediate questions?
Well, there were 2 in the chat box. Rach had to leave to go to another meeting, but she did. Just overall, what makes an artist investable? Are there certain things you look for in an artist, whether it's their work itself or the person that's creating the art or anything else is involved with that?
Yeah, I think, you want to look for an artist that has a really strong identifying style. Something where, I look at a ton of art, old art, new art, and rarely does something really strike me and make me stop in my tracks. But when I do see something like that, I take immediate note because that is an artist who is doing something different. And that's really what people want. People want to see mediums be pushed to the brink, like, wow, I didn't know they could do that with plastic, or themes being taken to the next level. And so I look for things like that. As a personality, I think humility is kind of a big thing. I think everybody always thinks as the artist as, this loner type and sometimes, I don't know, ego issues and things like that. But ultimately, those types of artists can be really tough to work with, and their reputation does get around. And there's several very well regarded in terms of their art, contemporary artists right now who are notoriously difficult to work with, and galleries are starting to back off. And what happens too now in terms of the gallery space, where there used to be exclusivity, so galleries used to manage an artist exclusively and they would sign a contract. That really doesn't happen too much anymore. They might have exclusivity over an artist geographically. So I can only sell Bob's work in the US, but I can't sell it in Europe, something like that. It's not too common. So what artists do a lot of times is ping pong between galleries. So if they're at a fair and another gallerist whispers in their ear, hey, I can offer you a better deal over here, or we can get you in front of some new collectors. Your gallery's not doing a good job. They might jump ship if they don't have that loyalty and that respect for the gallery and a good relationship. So I think the temper of the artist is really something to consider.
That's really good advice. And Kim Colt had a more granular question about the expenses in maintaining a collection. And if you want to go in the chat box, you can read it in a little bit
I
more
see this.
detail there. I'll let you roll with that.
The carrying cost, that's an interesting question. So there's no percentage rule of thumb, like, oh, it's about 20% of the cost of the piece or something like that, only because the medium of an artwork drives so much of the carry cost. So for example, I'm looking out the window right now, and we're across from the Papa John Sculpture Garden, and there's this beautiful glass panel piece. Well, a couple months ago, somebody kicked it and 3 of the panels shattered. Now, someone could kick the bronze that's next to it and nothing's going to happen to it. So the maintenance costs and the installation costs, the lighting costs, it's all variable, but they're significant. And when you start to get into these odd mediums, that envelope gets pushed even further. Neons, bulbs that can blow out, things
Wasn't there like a dead shark in a fish tank at one point?
Yeah, Damien Hirst, the ephemeral stuff. So, and a lot of artists, they want that to happen. So there's a great artist, Ronnie Horn, and she does a lot of work with glass, and she has a series of glass pieces that are called air burial. They're air burial series, and they're about waist high, but they're cast glass, and they're meant to be outside, which means they're going to deteriorate. They'll erode over time. Now that's the artist's intention. She wants that, and she wants to personally see the erosion process. So she actually asks to get like little updates as you have that piece outside. But like, how do you feel about that as the owner? This piece might be $500,000 to $800,000, and you're watching it kind of chip away. You have to maintain that piece very specifically, because again, she doesn't want it to not erode, but she wants it to erode organically, not because someone scuffed it with their shoe or a tree fell on it or something like that. So all of these different things can be expensive.
And it appears Bradley has posed a question as well there, Anne. It appears you're reading it, so I'll let you go from there.
How much exclusivity for galleries are you seeing? Well, again, when I started a million years ago, exclusivity was very real, and it was very specific, and it was usually time bound. So it was like, okay, for these 2 years, you are exclusively an Priftis artist, and it really barred you from having exhibits at other galleries, selling through other galleries. The idea was that all sales had to funnel through the gallery. So if a friend of a friend inquired about your work, you were, and it's a bit of a handshake, but required to then route that person's inquiry to the gallery, right? A lot of that stuff changed with the internet becoming a main way that people find out about artists. People go directly to the artist now. And so part of it's just unavoidable. The artists that are of a certain caliber, that again have good relationships with their galleries, and their galleries are good to them because it is a two-way street. When you look on their website on the contact page, it's the gallery's information and not the studio's information. And in a good gallery artist relationship, that is how it works, because the artist wants to concentrate on the art, not on the invoices, not on haggling about the price of the work. And so all the inquiries get funneled directly to the gallery, to the representative. So what I see most of all now are these very limited exclusive deals. So, hey, I'm going to take your art to an art fair. I have exclusivity over your work for the period of that art fair, so typically 5 to 7 days. And then let's say like a halo period of 2 months afterwards, because you know that that art fair is going to generate a bunch of PR and people are going to inquire after the fact. And so, I did all that work, or I paid for the marketing, transportation of your work down to Florida. And so I kind of own the sales that are around that period. So that's the most common sort of short-term exclusivity I see right now.
And Anne, I believe that that may be it for questions.
Yeah. Okay.
So
cool.
this has been brilliant. I mean,
Oh, I'm
you have
glad you liked
spoken
it.
for over an hour holding a phone to your cheek like
That's
that. And
hard. That's horrible. Speaking over an hour. My God, I'm sorry.
are you kidding
I'm
me?
sorry
People
for
pay good money for this. I'm excited. I got this for free. Thank you.
that. Well,
Hey,
thanks so much for
oh,
coordinating.
I do have one final question for you.
Mm.
Again, no one's going to watch this, but if somebody watches this who is beneficial to you, how is it that audience person can help you out? What could they do for you that would be a benefit? Because we do want to give back.
Just reach out to me. Just send me an email, shoot me a text, whatever it is. I can put my contact information in this chat box if that's helpful or some other way. But yeah, just reach out and consider me from this point on as your go-to art person. No question is too ridiculous. If it's
It's
related to
not.
art, reach out and I
You're
will
not
be
lying.
happy to help. You know?
And I am usually the one that generates the bizarre questions around art, either naive or just on the fringe. And again, Anne, as you may see my LinkedIn profile, always has an answer. It's simply amazing. So Anne, thank you. I can't thank you enough. A few things we have heard this year: how much Fargo, North Dakota, and Charleston, South Carolina were on the map. In 2023, Des Moines, Iowa is where you want to be. A lot of things are going to be happening in Des Moines. So just keep it out there. You heard it here first. Des Moines, Iowa is going to be popping in
What's
2020.
happening today here is snow. So a lot of it.
I'm
But that's
looking forward to it, though.
thank you so much. I really appreciate this, Andrew. And it was great